Something unusual has been unfolding across the capital over recent years. A gradual but unmistakable shift that has altered the rhythm of streets, the occupancy of flats, and the very character of neighborhoods that once seemed immune to change. The movement of people away from the center and out towards the edges, beyond the orbital motorways, and into towns and cities that previously existed in London's shadow, has become one of the defining features of the current era. This is not a sudden exodus prompted by any single event, but rather a slow accumulation of pressures that have made the arithmetic of daily life in the capital increasingly difficult to reconcile. For generations, London represented the pinnacle of aspiration for millions across the United Kingdom and beyond. Employment opportunities clustered within its boundaries, cultural institutions flourished in its neighborhoods, and the very idea of success became intertwined with a London postcode. Young professionals moved there in their 20s, accepting cramped accommodation and long commutes as the necessary price of proximity to opportunity. Families stretched their finances to remain close to schools and workplaces. Even retirees often stayed, unwilling to sever connections built over decades. The city absorbed wave after wave of newcomers, expanding outward and upward to accommodate an ever-growing population. What has changed is not any single variable, but the cumulative weight of many variables pressing down simultaneously. The cost of housing in London has reached levels that strain even comfortable incomes. A two-bedroom flat in a Zone 3 location now commands rental prices that would have seemed absurd just a decade ago. Purchase prices in many boroughs have risen to multiples of average earnings that make traditional mortgage calculations almost meaningless for first-time buyers without substantial family assistance. The gap between what people earn and what housing costs has widened to the point where the fundamental equation no longer balances for a growing proportion of the population. Rental markets across the capital have tightened considerably, with available properties often attracting dozens of applicants within hours of being listed. Landlords, many of whom have faced their own pressures from increased mortgage costs following interest rate rises that began in 2022 and continued through subsequent years, have passed these costs through to tenants where market conditions permit. In areas with high demand and limited supply, this has meant substantial rent increases that have outpaced wage growth. The average rental for a one-bedroom property in inner London now consumes a proportion of median income that leaves little room for savings, leisure, or the accumulation of a deposit for future purchase. The interest rate environment has fundamentally altered the calculations for both landlords and prospective buyers. After more than a decade of historically low borrowing costs, the shift to higher rates has repriced mortgage products across the market. Landlords with variable rate mortgages, or those refinancing fixed rate deals, have seen their monthly costs rise substantially, eroding yields that were already compressed by high purchase prices. Some have responded by selling properties, reducing the available rental stock further. Others have increased rents to maintain viability. Prospective buyers face larger monthly payments for any given property price, effectively reducing the amount they can afford to borrow, and therefore the properties they can consider purchasing. Employment patterns have shifted in ways that make London residence less essential than it once was. The widespread adoption of remote and hybrid working arrangements, accelerated by circumstances in the early part of the decade, has persisted and in many sectors become permanent. Workers who previously needed to be within commuting distance of central London offices 5 days per week now often need to attend only 2 or 3 days, or in some cases not at all. This has expanded the geographic range of viable residents considerably. A home in Bristol, Manchester, or Edinburgh becomes practical when the commute is weekly rather than daily, and the cost differential between such locations and London is substantial. The migration data tells a consistent story. Internal population movements show net outflows from London to other regions of England, as well as to Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. These movements are concentrated among certain demographic groups, particularly families with children approaching school age and established professionals in their 30s and 40s. The pattern suggests calculated decisions rather than panicked departures, with households weighing the trade-offs between London's opportunities and the quality of life available elsewhere. Gardens, space, proximity to countryside, and lower overall costs appear prominently in the accounts of those who have made the move. Regional property markets have felt the effects of this redistribution. Cities and towns within reasonable reach of London by rail have seen increased demand, pushing prices upward in locations that were previously considered affordable alternatives. The Midlands, the North, and coastal areas have attracted attention from buyers who find that their London property equity or their London salaries provide considerably more purchasing power in these locations. Builders have responded by increasing activity in these areas, though supply constraints, planning delays, and labor shortages continue to limit the pace at which new homes can be delivered. The character of London itself has begun to shift in subtle ways. Certain neighborhoods that once attracted young professionals have seen demographic changes as that cohort has aged and moved outward. Shops and services that catered to particular populations have closed or adapted. Schools in some areas have seen enrollment changes. The commercial property sector has faced its own challenges as office vacancy rates have risen, and the future of traditional central business district working has become uncertain. Retail high streets that depended on commuter and office worker footfall have struggled to maintain viability. Those who remain in London tend to fall into distinct categories. Some are bound by employment that cannot be performed remotely, including workers in hospitality, healthcare, retail, and other sectors requiring physical presence. Others have housing situations that would be impossible to replicate elsewhere, whether through ownership of relatively affordable properties purchased in earlier eras, access to social housing, or rent-controlled arrangements. Wealthy individuals for whom cost is not a constraining factor continue to find London attractive for its international connectivity, cultural offerings, and professional networks. Students and young graduates still arrive in significant numbers, accepting temporary difficult conditions as the entry price to career opportunities. For families, the decision calculus has become particularly complex. Housing costs consume a larger share of household budgets, leaving less for childcare, education, activities, and savings. The quality of family housing available at affordable price points in London often involves compromises on space, outdoor areas, and condition that would not be necessary in other locations. Schools face their own pressures, and the competition for places at desirable institutions adds stress to already stretched family situations. The appeal of a detached house with a garden in a smaller city or town, purchased for the same price as a cramped London flat, has become difficult to resist for many. Retirees face different but related considerations. Those who own London properties outright can access substantial equity by selling and relocating, providing funds for retirement that would otherwise require continued work or reduced living standards. The availability of healthcare, social connections, and suitable housing for aging in place varies considerably across the country, and not all who move find their expectations met. Some return to London after periods elsewhere, having found that the cultural offerings, family connections, or simply the familiarity of the city outweigh the benefits of cheaper and more spacious alternatives. The construction sector has responded to these shifting patterns with increased focus on developments outside London, though not uniformly across all regions. Areas with strong transport links, growing employment bases, and attractive quality of life characteristics have seen substantial building activity. Other areas have lagged, either due to lack of demand, planning constraints, or infrastructure limitations. The overall pace of new housing delivery across the country continues to fall short of estimated need, perpetuating the supply-demand imbalances that drive affordability problems in desirable locations. Economic pressures extend beyond housing costs. Energy bills, food prices, transport costs, and general inflation have all risen substantially in recent years, compressing household budgets and leaving less discretionary income. These pressures are felt nationwide, but are particularly acute in London, where baseline costs are higher and where the inability to reduce housing expenditure locks in a large fixed cost that cannot be avoided through economizing. The psychological burden of persistent financial pressure affects quality of life in ways that are difficult to quantify, but very real in their impact on individuals and families. The implications for the property market are significant and multifaceted. London prices, while still elevated by historical standards, have shown slower growth than many regional markets and in some areas have declined in real terms when inflation is accounted for. The traditional London premium, while not eliminated, has compressed as other locations have become more attractive and as the specific advantages of London residents have diminished for many categories of worker and household. Investors and developers who previously focused almost exclusively on London have diversified their attention to regional opportunities. What emerges from this analysis is a picture of profound structural change rather than cyclical fluctuation. The factors driving outward migration from London are not temporary or easily reversible. Remote working appears embedded in employment culture for the foreseeable future. Housing costs relative to incomes show no clear path to returning to more manageable ratios. The quality of life available in other parts of the country has improved in relative terms as connectivity, amenities, and employment opportunities have developed. The gravitational pull that London once exerted has weakened, not because London has become worse in absolute terms, but because the alternatives have become better and the costs of London have become harder to justify. The lived experience of those navigating these conditions varies enormously depending on individual circumstances. Homeowners who purchased before the most recent price surges find themselves in fundamentally different positions than those trying to enter the market today. Renters with stable long-term arrangements face different pressures than those searching for new accommodation in a constrained market. Those with employers requiring London presence have fewer options than those with full location flexibility. Understanding these distinctions is essential to grasping the complexity of what is unfolding. The transformation of London's role within the United Kingdom's geography of residence and work represents one of the most significant developments in recent decades. A city that defined aspiration and opportunity for generations is being reassessed by households making practical decisions about where and how to live. The outcome of this reassessment, playing out in thousands of individual choices, is reshaping not just London, but the entire country, redistributing population, demand, and economic activity in patterns that will take years to fully understand.